Blood ran down her fingertips as she clutched what was left of her travel document. The edges blackened, the cover scorched. The whole terminal seemed frozen, phones raised, mouths hanging open, the smell of burnt paper hanging in the air. What nobody in that moment realized was that the woman standing there with blistered fingers and steady eyes was married to the one man who could shake the entire justice system to its core. And this mistake, this single reckless act, was about to change everything. Now let me take you back, because the story didn't start with fire. It began with something much quieter, much more ordinary, the weary shuffle of travelers off a long-haul flight. Claire Johnson stepped off her plane at Monroe International, a tired smile crossing her face. She had just flown back from Paris, where she'd been invited to moderate an international forum on press freedom. She was 42, an award-winning journalist, sharp as ever, but also just someone desperate to grab her luggage, hug her husband, and get home. Her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "Landed safe, can't wait to see you." Daniel Johnson wasn't just her husband. He was the first Black attorney general in U.S. history, a man who had been trying to push through a reform bill that half the country was arguing about. Claire typed back quickly. "Here, customs line now." That line, that cursed line. Claire had priority status, business class ticket, everything that normally speeds you right through. But she found herself staring at the tall, square-jawed officer at booth number 5. His nameplate read J. Harris. He waved the white family in front of her, through without so much as a glance at their forms. Then he looked up at her with an expression that was less professional, more personal. "Passport and declaration," he barked. No eye contact, no courtesy. She handed over her dark blue diplomatic passport, the kind reserved for cabinet members' families. Harris flipped through it slowly, almost mockingly, pausing at each stamp as though he were hunting for something wrong. He asked her questions she'd answered 100 times before. "What was your trip? For how long were you gone?" She answered calmly, politely. But he wasn't letting go. "This passport looks off," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Off how?" she asked, keeping her voice measured. "Doesn't look like it belongs to you. Got more ID." She handed over her driver's license. By now, people were watching. A young woman behind her had pulled out her phone, sneaking a recording. Claire could feel the burn of stares on her back, but she refused to shrink. "Officer, is there a problem?" "My husband is expecting me. If there's something you need to verify, please explain it." That one word, husband, seemed to light a fuse in him. He smirked. "Your husband doesn't matter here. I'm the authority." Claire reached for her phone. "Then I'll record this for clarity." His voice snapped like a whip. "Recording isn't allowed here." And then it happened. With the eyes of travelers all around, Harris snatched the passport, pulled a lighter from his pocket, and flicked it alive. Before anyone could stop him, the corner of that federal document caught fire. Flames crawled across the cover. Claire gasped, grabbing for it, searing her fingers as she put it out against her palm. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, the hiss of cameras clicking. And Harris? He puffed up his chest as if he'd just proven something. "Now it's invalid. You're being detained for fraudulent documents." Claire's blood dripped onto the tile. But her voice was steady as a stone. "I want your badge number, and I want to speak to your commanding officer. Right now." What he didn't realize was that every camera in that terminal had just captured him, not enforcing law, but destroying it. They dragged her into a windowless room, the kind meant to make people feel small. She sat upright, posture perfect, despite the sting in her hand and the metal chair digging into her back. For 90 minutes, nobody came. No water, no aid. Outside, Harris was busy rewriting reality, typing up a report that painted her as belligerent, threatening. His colleagues stood around, silent, complicit. But not all of them. A young officer, barely out of training, slipped into the room with a bottle of water and antiseptic wipes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, sliding them across. "This isn't right." Claire looked at her, saw the flicker of conscience in her eyes, and said softly, "What's your name, Taylor?" she replied, voice trembling. "Taylor, you're doing the right thing. Remember that." Meanwhile, in the security control room, Chief Marcus Davis, one of the few Black men in leadership there, watched the footage with rising fury. He stormed out, confronted Harris in the hallway. "Protocols confiscate and report, not burn federal property. Release her, now." But Harris dragged his feet. He'd crossed a line, and part of him seemed determined to dig deeper rather than admit it. What he didn't know, social media had already blown up. Within an hour, hashtags were trending, hashtags Justice for Claire, burned passport. Millions of people were watching that video before Harris even finished his false report. By the time Claire was finally granted her phone call, civil rights attorney Malcolm Price was already on his way to the airport, videos in hand. And Daniel Johnson, her husband, was in the Oval Office when his secure line buzzed. He stepped out, listened in silence as Claire described the fire, the burn on her hand, the hours locked away. His grip tightened on the phone. "Don't sign anything," he told her. "I'll handle this." 30 minutes. When Harris finally stumbled onto the truth, Googling her name, realizing she wasn't just any traveler, but the Attorney General's wife, his face went pale. It was too late. Federal agents were already en route. The next hours unraveled fast. Harris was stripped of his badge. Homeland Security opened an immediate investigation. News vans camped outside the terminal. Protesters gathered with signs. "Who polices the police?" and "Justice for Claire." Claire, though shaken, walked out with her dignity intact, her hand bandaged, her head held high. Cameras swarmed, and she faced them squarely. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about a system that allowed this to happen. How many others face this without witnesses, without cameras, without someone to call?" That one line turned her into more than a victim. She became the voice of a movement. The trial that followed was electric. Prosecutors laid out a pattern, years of complaints against Harris buried in red tape. Former travelers testified, Black families, Latino parents, Muslim doctors, all describing the same treatment. Officer Taylor, despite threats, took the stand and said plainly, he bragged about putting minorities in their place. And then the jury watched the footage again, flames licking across that passport. Harris's sneer audible as he muttered a slur under his breath. You could see jurors flinch. When Claire testified, she didn't dramatize. She told it plain. "I stayed calm because I knew if I showed anger, it would be used against me." Her words cut through the courtroom like a blade. The defense tried to spin it that she invoked her husband to intimidate, that Harris was under stress. But the more they argued, the clearer it became. He hadn't made a split-second mistake. He had revealed who he really was. The verdict was guilty. On all counts: destruction of federal property, civil rights violations, obstruction, 5 years in prison, a career in ashes. But the story didn't end with his downfall. It sparked something bigger. New oversight boards, new training standards, whistleblower protections. Claire wrote an article that became one of the most read pieces of the year, titled "The Burning America's Reckoning." She went on to win awards not because she was the Attorney General's wife, but because she had turned personal pain into public change. And Harris, months later, from behind prison walls, he sent a letter. He wrote about growing up angry, about blaming the wrong people, about never questioning the culture he swam in. He admitted he couldn't undo the harm, but that her dignity had forced him to face truths he'd buried for years. Claire read it, tucked it away, and moved forward. Because this was never about one man, one burned passport, one bad officer. It was about a system and whether America had the courage to change it. So here's the question I'll leave with you. Do you believe true reform is possible, or are we just catching more of the same old story on camera these days? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you think dignity should never depend on skin color or status. And subscribe if you want more stories that force us to confront what justice really means. Because in the end, a burned passport became more than ash. It became a symbol of pain, of resilience, and of a fight that still isn't over.